Chapter 19. The mistake made by Alexey Alexandrovich in that, when preparing for seeing his wife, he had overlooked the possibility that her repentance might be sincere, and he might forgive her, and she might not die. This mistake was 2 months after his return from Moscow brought home to him in all its significance. But the mistake made by him had arisen not simply from his having overlooked that contingency, but also from the fact that until that day of his interview with his dying wife, he had not known his own heart. At his sick wife's bedside, he had for the first time in his life given way to that feeling of sympathetic suffering always roused in him by the sufferings of others, and hitherto looked on by him with shame as a harmful weakness. In pity for her, and remorse for having desired her death, and most of all, the joy of forgiveness, made him at once conscious not simply of the relief of his own sufferings, but of a spiritual peace he had never experienced before. He suddenly felt that the very thing that was the source of his sufferings had become the source of his spiritual joy, that what had seemed insoluble while he was judging, blaming, and hating had become clear and simple when he forgave and loved. He forgave his wife and pitied her for her sufferings and her remorse. He forgave Vronsky and pitied him, especially after reports reached him of his despairing action. He felt more for his son than ever before, and he blamed himself now for having taken too little interest in him. But for the little newborn baby he felt a quite peculiar sentiment, not of pity only, but of tenderness. At first, from a feeling of compassion alone, he had been interested in the delicate little creature who was not his child, and who was cast on one side during her mother's illness, and would certainly have died if he had not troubled about her, and he did not himself observe how fond he became of her. He would go into the nursery several times a day, and sit there for a long while, so that the nurses, who were at first afraid of him, got quite used to his presence. Sometimes, for half an hour at a stretch, he would sit silently gazing at the saffron-red, downy, wrinkled face of the sleeping baby, watching the movements of the frowning brows and the fat little hands with clenched fingers that rubbed the little eyes and nose. At such moments particularly, Alexey Alexandrovich had a sense of perfect peace and inward harmony, and saw nothing extraordinary in his position, nothing that ought to be changed. But as time went on, he saw more and more distinctly that however natural the position now seemed to him, he would not long be allowed to remain in it. He felt that, besides the blessed spiritual force controlling his soul, there was another, a brutal force as powerful or more powerful, which controlled his life, and that this force would not allow him that humble peace he longed for. He felt that everyone was looking at him with inquiring wonder, that he was not understood, and that something was expected of him. Above all, he felt the instability and unnaturalness of his relations with his wife. When the softening effect of the near approach of death had passed away, Alexey Alexandrovich began to notice that Anna was afraid of him, ill at ease with him, and could not look him straight in the face. She seemed to be wanting, and not daring, to tell him something, as though, foreseeing their present relations could not continue, she seemed to be expecting something from him. Towards the end of February, it happened that Anna's baby daughter, who had been named Anna too, fell ill. Alexey Alexandrovich was in the nursery in the morning, and leaving orders for the doctor to be sent for, he went to his office. On finishing his work, he returned home at 4. Going into the hall, he saw a handsome groom in a braided livery and a bear fur cape, holding a white fur cloak. "Who is here?" asked Alexey Alexandrovitch. "Princess Elizaveta Fedorovna Verskaya," the groom answered, and it seemed to Alexey Alexandrovitch that he grinned. During all this difficult time, Alexey Alexandrovitch had noticed that his worldly acquaintances, especially women, took a peculiar interest in him and his wife. All these acquaintances he observed with difficulty concealing their mirth at something, the same mirth that he had perceived in the lawyer's eyes, and just now in the eyes of the groom. Everyone seemed hugely delighted, as though they had just been at a wedding. When they met him, with ill-disguised enjoyment, they inquired after his wife's health. The presence of Princess Verskaya was unpleasant to Alexey Alexandrovitch from the memories associated with her, and also because he disliked her, and he went straight to the nursery. In the day nursery, Seryozha, leaning on the table with his legs on a chair, was drawing and chatting away merrily. The English governess, who had during Anna's illness replaced the French one, was sitting near the boy, knitting a shawl. She hurriedly got up, curtsied, and pulled Seryozha. Alexey Alexandrovitch stroked his son's hair, answered the governess's inquiries about his wife, and asked what the doctor had said of the baby. "The doctor said it was nothing serious, and he ordered a bath, sir." "But she is still in pain," said Alexey Alexandrovitch, listening to the baby screaming in the next room. "I think it's a wet nurse, sir," the Englishwoman said firmly. "What makes you think so?" he asked, stopping short. "It's just as it was at Countess Paul's, sir. They gave the baby medicine, and it turned out that the baby was simply hungry. The nurse had no milk, sir." Alexey Alexandrovitch pondered, and after standing still a few seconds, he went in at the other door. The baby was lying with its head thrown back, stiffening itself in its nurse's arms, and would not take the breast offered it, and it never ceased screaming in spite of the double hushing of the wet nurse and the other nurse who was bending over her. "Still no better?" said Alexey Alexandrovitch. "She's very restless," answered the nurse in a whisper. "Miss Edwards says perhaps the wet nurse has no milk," he said. "I think so too, Alexey Alexandrovitch." "Then why didn't you say so?" "Who's the one to say it to? Anna Arkadyevna still ill," said the nurse discontentedly. The nurse was an old servant of the family, and in her simple words there seemed to Alexey Alexandrovitch an allusion to his position. The baby screamed louder than ever, struggling and sobbing. The nurse, with a gesture of despair, went to it, took it from the wet nurse's arms, and began walking up and down, rocking it. "You must ask the doctor to examine the wet nurse," said Alexey Alexandrovitch. The smartly dressed and healthy-looking nurse, frightened at the idea of losing her place, muttered something to herself, and covering her bosom, smiled contemptuously at the ideas of doubts being cast upon her abundance of milk. In that smile, too, Alexey Alexandrovitch saw a sneer at his position. "Luckless child," said the nurse, hushing the baby, and still walking up and down with it. Alexey Alexandrovitch sat down, and with a despondent and suffering face watched the nurse walking to and fro. When the child at last was still and had been put in a deep bed, and the nurse, after smoothing the little pillow, had left her, Alexey Alexandrovitch got up, and walking awkwardly on tiptoe, approached the baby. For a minute he was still, and with the same despondent face gazed at the baby, but all at once a smile that moved his hair and the skin of his forehead came out on his face, and he went as softly out of the room. In the dining room he rang the bell and told the servant who came in to send again for the doctor. He felt vexed with his wife for not being anxious about this exquisite baby, and in this vexed humor he had no wish to go to her. He had no wish either to see Princess Betsy. But his wife might wonder why he did not go to her as usual, and so, overcoming his disinclination, he went towards the bedroom. As he walked over the soft rug towards the door, he could not help overhearing a conversation he did not want to hear. "If he hadn't been going away, I could have understood your answer, and his too. But your husband ought to be above that," Betsy was saying. "It's not for my husband, for myself. I don't wish it. Don't say that," answered Anna's excited voice. "Yes, but you must care to say goodbye to a man who has shot himself on your account." "That's just why I don't want to." With a dismayed and guilty expression, Alexey Alexandrovitch stopped and would have gone back unobserved. But reflecting that this would be undignified, he turned back again, and clearing his throat he went up to the bedroom. The voices were silent, and he went in. Anna, in a gray dressing gown with a crop of short clustering black curls on her round head, was sitting on a couch. The eagerness died out of her face, as it always did at the sight of her husband. She dropped her head and looked round uneasily at Betsy. Betsy, dressed in the height of the latest fashion, in a hat that towered somewhere over her head like a shade on a lamp, in a blue dress with violet crossway stripes slanting one way on the bodice and the other on the skirt, was sitting beside Anna, her tall, flat figure held erect. Bowing her head, she greeted Alexey Alexandrovitch with an ironical smile. "Ah," she said, as though surprised, "I'm very glad you're home. You never put in an appearance anywhere, and I haven't seen you ever since Anna has been ill. I have heard all about it, your anxiety. Yes, you're a wonderful husband," she said, with a meaning and affable air, as though she were bestowing an order of magnanimity on him for his conduct to his wife. Alexey Alexandrovitch bowed frigidly, and kissing his wife's hand, asked how she was. "Better, I think," she said, avoiding his eyes. "But you're rather a feverish-looking color," he said, laying stress on the word feverish. "We've been talking too much," said Betsy. "I feel it's selfishness on my part, and I am going away." She got up, but Anna, suddenly flushing, quickly caught at her hand. "No, wait a minute, please. I must tell you. No, you." She turned to Alexey Alexandrovitch, and her neck and brow were suffused with crimson. "I won't, and I can't keep anything secret from you," she said. Alexey Alexandrovitch cracked his fingers and bowed his head. "Betsy's been telling me that Count Vronsky wants to come here to say goodbye before his departure for Tashkent." She did not look at her husband, and was evidently in haste to have everything out, however hard it might be for her. "I told her I could not receive him." "You said, my dear, that it would depend on Alexey Alexandrovitch," Betsy corrected her. "Oh, no, I can't receive him, and what object would there—" She stopped suddenly and glanced inquiringly at her husband. He did not look at her. "In short, I don't wish it." Alexey Alexandrovitch advanced and would have taken her hand. Her first impulse was to jerk back her hand from the damp hand with the big swollen veins that sought hers, but with an obvious effort to control herself, she pressed his hand. I am very grateful to you for your confidence, but, he said, feeling with confusion and annoyance that what he could decide easily and clearly by himself, he could not discuss before Princess Betsy, who to him stood for the incarnation of that brute force which would inevitably control him in the life he led in the eyes of the world, and hinder him from giving way to his feeling of love and forgiveness. He stopped short, looking at Princess Betsy. "Well, goodbye, my darling," said Betsy, getting up. She kissed Anna and went out. Alexey Alexandrovitch escorted her out. "Alexey Alexandrovitch, I know you are a truly magnanimous man," said Betsy, stopping in the little drawing-room, and with special warmth shaking hands with him once more. "I am an outsider, but I so love her and respect you that I venture to advise. Receive him. Alexey Vronsky is the soul of honor, and he is going away to Tashkent. Thank you, Princess, for your sympathy and advice, but the question of whether my wife can or cannot see anyone, she must decide herself." He said this from habit, lifting his brows with dignity, and reflected immediately that whatever his words might be, there could be no dignity in his position, and he saw this by the suppressed, malicious, and ironical smile with which Betsy glanced at him after this phrase. Chapter 20. Alexey Alexandrovitch took leave of Betsy in the drawing-room and went to his wife. She was lying down, but hearing his step she sat up hastily in her former attitude and looked in a scared way at him. He saw she had been crying. "I am very grateful for your confidence in me." He repeated gently in Russian the phrase he had said in Betsy's presence in French, and sat down beside her. When he spoke to her in Russian, using the Russian thou of intimacy and affection, it was insufferably irritating to Anna. "And I am very grateful for your decision. I, too, imagine that since he is going away, there is no sort of necessity for Count Vronsky to come here. However, But I've said so already, so why repeat it?" Anna suddenly interrupted him with an irritation she could not succeed in repressing. No sort of necessity, she thought, for a man to come and say goodbye to the woman he loves, for whom he was ready to ruin himself, and has ruined himself, and who cannot live without him. No sort of necessity. She compressed her lips and dropped her burning eyes to his hands with their swollen veins. They were rubbing each other. "Let us never speak of it," she added more calmly. "I have left this question to you to decide, and I am very glad to see," Alexey Alexandrovitch was beginning. "That my wish coincides with your own," she finished quickly, exasperated at his talking so slowly while she knew beforehand all he would say. "Yes," he assented, "and Princess Verskaya's interference in the most difficult private affairs is utterly uncalled for. She especially—" "I don't believe a word of what's being said about her," said Anna quickly. "I know she really cares for me." Alexey Alexandrovitch sighed and said nothing. She played nervously with the tassel of her dressing gown, glancing at him with that torturing sensation of physical repulsion for which she blamed herself, though she could not control it. Her only desire now was to be rid of his oppressive presence. "I have just sent for the doctor," said Alexey Alexandrovitch. "I am very well. What do I want the doctor for?" "No, the little one cries, and they say the nurse hasn't enough milk." Why didn't you let me nurse her when I begged to? Anyway, Alexey Alexandrovitch knew what was meant by that anyway. She's a baby, and they're killing her. She rang the bell and ordered the baby to be brought to her. I begged to nurse her. I wasn't allowed to, and now I'm blamed for it. I don't blame. Yes, you do blame me. My God, why didn't I die? And she broke into sobs. Forgive me. I'm nervous. I'm unjust, she said, controlling herself. But do, please, go away. No, it can't go on like this, Alexey Alexandrovitch said to himself decidedly as he left his wife's room. Never had the impossibility of his position in the world's eyes, and his wife's hatred of him, and altogether the might of that mysterious, brutal force that guided his life against his spiritual inclinations, in exacted conformity with its decrees, and change in his attitude to his wife, been presented to him with such distinctness as that day. He saw clearly that all the world and his wife expected of him something, but what exactly he could not make out. He felt that this was rousing in his soul a feeling of anger destructive of his peace of mind and of all the good of his achievement. He believed that for Anna herself it would be better to break off all relations with Vronsky. But if they all thought this out of the question, he was even ready to allow these relations to be renewed, so long as the children were not disgraced, and he was not deprived of them, nor forced to change his position. Bad as this might be, it was anyway better than a rupture, which would put her in a hopeless and shameful position, and deprive him of everything he cared for. But he felt helpless. He knew beforehand that everyone was against him, and that he would not be allowed to do what seemed to him now so natural and right, but would be forced to do what was wrong, though it seemed the proper thing to them. Chapter 21. Before Betsy had time to walk out of the drawing-room, she was met in the doorway by Stepan Arkadyevitch, who had just come from Yeliseev's, where a consignment of fresh oysters had been received. "Ah, Princess, what a delightful meeting," he began. "I've been to see you." "A meeting for 1 minute where I'm going," said Betsy, smiling and putting on her glove. "Don't put on your glove yet, Princess. Let me kiss your hand. There's nothing I'm so thankful to the revival of the old fashions for as the kissing the hand." He kissed Betsy's hand. "When shall we see each other?" "You don't deserve it," answered Betsy, smiling. "Oh, yes, I deserve a great deal, for I've become a most serious person. I don't only manage my own affairs, but other people's too," he said with a significant expression. "Oh, I'm so glad," answered Betsy, at once understanding that he was speaking of Anna. And going back into the drawing-room, they stood in a corner. "He's killing her," said Betsy, in a whisper full of meaning. "It's impossible, impossible." "I'm so glad you think so," said Stepan Arkadyevitch, shaking his head with a serious and sympathetically distressed expression. "That is what I've come to Petersburg for." "The whole town is talking of it," she said. "It's an impossible situation. She pines and pines away. He doesn't understand that she's one of those women who can't trifle with her feelings. One of two things. Either let him take her away, act with energy, or give her a divorce. This is stifling her." Yes, just so," Oblonsky said, sighing. "That's just what I've come for. At least, not solely for that. I've been made a kammerherr. Of course, one has to say thank you, but the chief thing was having to settle this. Well, God help you, said Betsy. After accompanying Betsy to the outside hall, once more kissing her hand above the glove at the point where the pulse beats, and murmuring to her such unseemly nonsense that she did not know whether to laugh or be angry, Stepan Arkadyevitch went to his sister. He found her in tears. Although he happened to be bubbling over with good spirits, Stepan Arkadyevitch immediately and quite naturally fell into that sympathetic, poetically emotional tone which harmonized with her mood. He asked her how she was and how she spent the morning. Very, very miserably, today and this morning and all past days and all days to come, she said. I think you're giving way to pessimism. You must rouse yourself. You must look life in the face. I know it's hard, but I have heard it said that women love men even for their vices, Anna began suddenly. But I hate him for his virtues. I can't live with him. Do you understand? The sight of him has a physical effect on me. It makes me beside myself. I can't live with him. What am I to do? I have been unhappy, and used to think one couldn't be more unhappy, but the awful state of things I am going through now, I could never have conceived. Would you believe it, that knowing he's a good man, a splendid man, that I'm not worth his little finger, still I hate him. I hate him for his generosity, and there's nothing left for me but... She would have said death, but Stepan Arkadyevitch would not let her finish. You are ill and overwrought, he said. Believe me, you're exaggerating dreadfully. There's nothing so terrible in it. And Stepan Arkadyevitch smiled. No one else in Stepan Arkadyevitch's place, having to do with such despair, would have ventured to smile. The smile would have seemed brutal. But in his smile there was so much of sweetness and almost feminine tenderness that his smile did not wound, but softened and soothed. His gentle, soothing words and smiles were as soothing and softening as almond oil. And Anna soon felt this. No, Stiva, she said. I'm lost, worse than lost. I can't say yet that all is over. On the contrary, I feel that it is not over. I'm an overstrained string that must snap, but it's not ended yet, and it will have a fearful end. No matter, we must let the string be loosened, little by little. There's no position from which there is no way of escape. I have thought and thought, only one. Again he knew from her terrified eyes that this one way of escape in her thought was death, and he would not let her say it. Not at all, he said. Listen to me. You can't see your own position as I can. Let me tell you candidly my opinion. Again he smiled discreetly, his almond oil smile. I'll begin from the beginning. You married a man 20 years older than yourself. You married him without love and not knowing what love was. It was a mistake, let's admit it. A fearful mistake, said Anna. But I repeat, it's an accomplished fact. You had, let us say, then, the misfortune to love a man, not your husband. That was a misfortune, but that, too, is an accomplished fact. And your husband knew it and forgave it. He stopped at each sentence, waiting for her to object, but she made no answer. That's so. Now the question is, can you go on living with your husband? Do you wish it? Does he wish it? I know nothing. But you said yourself that you can't endure him. No, I didn't say so. I deny it. I can't tell. I don't know anything about it. Yes, but you can't understand. I feel I'm lying head downwards in a sort of pit, but I ought not to save myself, and I can't. Never mind. We'll slip something under and pull you out. I understand that you can't take it on yourself to express your wishes, your feelings. There's nothing I wish, except for it to all be over. But he sees this and knows it. And do you suppose it weighs on him any less than on you? You're wretched, he's wretched, and what good can come of it? While divorce would solve the difficulty completely. With some effort, Stepan Arkadyevitch brought out his central idea and looked significantly at her. She said nothing and shook her cropped head in dissent. But from the look in her face that suddenly brightened into its old beauty, he saw that if she did not desire this, it was simply because it seemed to her unattainable happiness. I'm awfully sorry for you, and how happy I should be if I could arrange things, said Stepan Arkadyevitch, smiling more boldly. Don't speak, don't say a word. God grant only that I may speak as I feel. I am going to him now. Anna looked at him with dreamy, shining eyes and said nothing.